Hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. This is an educational channel, and we've been taking our time getting through these Bible decodes, primarily coming from the book of Luke and the book of Michael Menesgotz, Menesgotz, and his new book that is called Christianity's Origins as a Flavian Secrecy Cult. And this is one of several books that have come out in the last 20 years that have argued for the Roman origins hypothesis of the New Testament, that the Romans wrote the New Testament, the Caesars, in particular the Caesars from the Flavian dynasty. That includes Emperor Vespasian and his two sons, Emperors Titus and Domitian, and that is from 69 to 96 AD. The theory basically goes that the Romans were kind of hard bitten by the war that they just got done fighting against the Jews. There was also a Roman civil war that just occurred. And Emperor Vespasian, before he became emperor, he was one of the military generals to fight off the Jews, or really lay siege to Jerusalem. After the zealots in Jerusalem kicked out the Roman puppet Herod government, and his son Titus was also a military general who took over when Vespasian got the call to come to Rome to be the new emperor. Both Vespasian and Titus were actually wounded in this war, and that might have been the last straw, but for whatever reasons, the Romans decided to move to psychological warfare. They were very tired of the Jews. For the last over 125 years, the Jews had been a major pain for the Romans to administer under their empire. The Romans kind of took over in about 63 BC, and it was one war after an insurrection, after an uprising, after a revolution with the Jews. Because the Jews were a separatist people. The Romans were trying to assimilate people into their empire. And the Jews had this monotheistic God who saw the Jews, or said that the Jews were his chosen people, and had set up a long list of rituals that the Jews had to carry out to remain in good stead with God, and including a lot of kosher food laws and animal sacrifice rituals and circumcision rituals and strictures against graven images. And so this was difficult for the Romans, because the Jews were actually willing to die to carry out these rituals. And so the Romans didn't mind killing Jews, but they didn't necessarily have enough resources to put all the inordinate amount of attention that they needed to put on the Jews. With all of the hundreds of other nations that the Romans had under their umbrella, the Jews were just very high maintenance. And again, so Titus and Vespasian, and probably several others who also belonged to the court of the Caesars, decided that they were going to hit the Jews with some psychological operations, psychological warfare. They knew the Jews were waiting for a Messiah. The Jews were waiting for a military leader who was going to come in and help them overthrow the Romans. And that really happened in about 66 AD. Simon and Eleazar and John were kind of the three zealot leaders who kicked out the Herods. But when they kicked out the Herods, Emperor Nero decided to bring in the heavy artillery with General Vespasian and lay siege to Jerusalem. The whole thing took several years, and they had to kill a lot of Jews to win this war. So instead of these zealot messiahs that the Jews were waiting on, the Romans decided to propose a Messiah who was a Prince of Peace and who believed in rendering unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and who believed in turning the other cheek to oppression, walking an extra mile with the Roman soldier's backpack, to believe that the Roman slave owner had the greatest faith in all of Israel, and to exhort his Jewish comrades to forgive the Romans, for they know not what they do, while at the same time going outside the Jewish temple and overturning the tables of the Jewish money changers who were changing Roman coins which had graven images on them for Jewish coins which did not, so they could be brought into the temple. And disrupting the commerce of the Jewish entrepreneurs who were out there selling doves and pigeons for animal sacrifices. So Jesus, he was anti-Jew. He was anti the Jewish rituals. Put an end to many Jewish ritual, including changing the Sabbath from Saturday to Sunday, and ending the need for any type of circumcision or kosher food laws. These are all things that were the direct result of Jesus. And so it isn't a big stretch to think that the Romans came up with this whole thing. So that's really kind of your first red flag. Your second red flag is that this is exactly what the Romans would do, because this is exactly what the Romans did do in other situations in the first century, creating a new religion for psychological purposes. They, in fact, did it to a different set of Jews, not the Jewish zealots, but the Jewish Pharisees. They used almost the exact same method to create a campus for the Pharisees to go into Scripture, just the endless analysis of Jewish Scripture, because they had no longer had a temple. So they had to kind of adapt their rituals and beliefs to this new reality where they didn't have, what they needed in order to carry out their rituals. And that was known as Rabbinical Judaism. And that was established under Vespasian. And a lot of Vespasian's family members were, early contributors to the Rabbinical Judaism established at Yavne that eventually led to the writing of the Talmud. And the Romans also had a monopoly on censorship. They had a monopoly on publishing. And they had a monopoly on distribution. They also spoke and wrote in Greek, as well as Latin. And the New Testament is written in Greek. It would be a strange thing for it to have been written in Greek, having been written in Judea by Aramaic-speaking Jews there. Although Greek was present in Judea, it was not common. It was for the elites only. So the final red flag I won't say final, absolutely not final. The third red flag is what Michael Menescot brings up in his book. So this is really getting at how the Romans did this. First, they wrote this story about the Jewish Messiah who was the Prince of Peace, and they backdated the story by 40 years. So they wrote it in the early 70s and placed it in the early 30s AD. And they gave Jesus a 3-year ministry in Judea. Then they wrote a history of the Jewish war that they had just gotten done fighting. And they wrote that under the name of Josephus. Josephus was quite likely this guy named Arius Piso, who was kind of a shadow emperor to Vespasian and Titus and a close relative. But whoever it was, it might have been an entire team of intellectuals. But they wrote as Josephus, and these two works are parallels to each other. They mirror each other. They bounce off each other. They, parody each other back mutually. They're supposed to be read intertextually. Whoever wrote one also wrote the other. And if we know that Josephus was writing from Caesar's palace at Rome, then we also know that the Gospels were written at Caesar's palace at Rome. And Menescot digs into this, and he digs into the book of Luke and Josephus's War of the Jews, 7 volumes. And in just the book of Luke, he found 250 parallels between the two works. Some of them are so detailed and well hidden that you would gasp at the effort that must have gone into doing this. And some of them are not such strong parallels. They are parallels, but they may be implied. You may need to have an extra piece of information from outside the texts, or they may just be kind of a cheap parallel just to have a parallel. Because that's what Menescot does, is he graphs all of the parallels out. He puts the book of Luke on the vertical axis, and he puts War of the Jews by Josephus on the horizontal axis. And every time he finds a parallel, he puts a dot at the corresponding location. You can see this in the thumbnail for this video. And by the time he's done, he has formed 5 near-perfect letters in Latin. So it should be just a pattern of noise. It should be just random, but it isn't. It's 5 letters in Latin, the language of the Roman elites. APTVS. We pretty much know that the TVS is Titus Vespasianus. And that is the same imprint that they used for some of the coins that they minted during their reigns. TVS. The AP is more questionable, but I believe that it's Arius Piso. Menescot thinks it might be Ares Piso, Ares, the god of war, otherwise known as Mars in the Roman. He's going to be arguing that here in this passage that we're going to read today. But the main point is that what this shows is that not only did the Romans write the Gospels, but they literally signed their name to them as proof that they had done this. They called it grace. Grace was that they left evidence that you can find in the future to show you who actually wrote the Gospels. And really the rest of the New Testament as well, because the Pauline epistles follow very much the same pattern, as does the book of Revelation. They might have been written in a later period, and they might have been written by different Romans. But especially the Pauline epistles, I think, were likely written by Pliny the Younger, who was a famous Roman intellectual rhetorician from the late 1st, early 2nd century, and he was the foster brother of Arius Piso. And you can look at Pliny's travels, and they pretty much mirror Paul's travels. But the parallels in the Gospels are, a lot of them are what Jesus predicts is going to happens at the hand of Titus, Emperor Titus. So Jesus predicts something, and that prediction is fulfilled by Titus. The place where Jesus makes the prediction is the same place that Titus fulfills fulfills the prophecy. And the time when Jesus makes the prediction is the same time that Titus fulfills the prediction, except that it's offset by 40 years to the day, often to the hour. And that's just one set of several different parallel themes that exist between the Gospels and War of the Jews. But what that really means is that Titus, Caesar, is the second coming of Jesus. And we're not waiting for the second coming to happen in the 21st century. It happened in the 1st century. And that is documented by Josephus in his War of the Jews. One of the things that really irked Titus is that he could not get the Jews to call him God or to call him Lord. And this was just another way that he could get them to call him Lord without them even knowing that they were doing so. Okay, let's get to the text here. A very frequent criticism of Roman Piso's evidence. Roman Piso is a modern scholar who claims that he is one of the, I'm sure that's a pseudonym, but he claims that he's one of Arius Piso's distant relatives, and that he had a passed down family tradition that told him that his great whatever relative wrote the Gospels. It wasn't really just him either. It was his entire family. That they wrote these Gospels as plays, that they would, because most people were illiterate. They went around and they performed these Gospels as plays in front of people. Primarily, it looks like the Gospels were written for the Jews, and the Pauline epistles were written for the Gentiles. Okay, a very frequent criticism of Roman Piso's evidence suggesting the Gospels were written by Roman royals. I'm sorry, I'm unable to see. Okay, called a Roman royal called Arius Piso, who was the younger generation to Vespasian, is that nowhere, not even in Jewish war itself, is there any explicit mention of a separate royal with the name Arius Piso. This difficulty is dispensed with by realizing that Ares, A-R-E-S, and Piso are two forenames that Emperor Titus planned to be called by within the upper rank of the secrecy cult. So he's really saying he doesn't think that Arius Piso really existed. He thinks that he was a kind of an alter ego of Titus. And that's one thing that you have to really bear in mind about the Romans, is that they used a ton of aliases, pseudonyms, pen names, riddles, jokes, codes. This was like a big pastime for them. And they got their jollies out of, making fun of people. The Jews did it too, with typology and other literary tricks, having to read books intertextually. This was just kind of an ancient, form of television or something like that. It was entertainment. Okay, for my third example, I must begin by showing how the name Ares or Arius can be found where two words are hidden within one. I stress that in places this regurgitates Roman Piso's extensive work. In other places, it is my own take, but it is all building up to a key discovery that I'll give later. I'll start with Joseph of Arimathea. Now, you remember Joseph is Arimathea is the guy who brought Jesus down from the cross and gave him a tomb. I'll start with Joseph Arimathea in the Gospels, who comes to Jesus' tomb. The first name Joseph, or Yosef, is a Hebrew anagram of piso. He showed that in the last episode. And the last name Arimathea has an obvious way that it should be split into two, since Mathia is a common name meaning gift of God, like Matthew. Splitting up Joseph Arimathea leads to Joseph Era gift of God, and adding the anagram of Joseph allows us to arrive at Aries Piso gift of God. Now, I'm not sure why he goes in this direction. Josephus himself, or whoever Josephus is, in his War of the Jews, or it's possibly only in his autobiography, says that his actual name is, when he was adopted by Vespasian to become a member of the Flavians, he then went by Flavius Josephus. But prior to that, he went as Josephus Bar Matthias. Bar, I think it's Aramaic, means the son of. So Joseph, the son of Matthias. So this is very, very close to Joseph Arimathea already. But he moves into this Aries Piso gift of God, translating Matthew as gift of God. But the parallels are obvious regardless of the gift of God thing. Another example is found in Zacharias, who appears to be a parody of Vespasian, and Lazarus, who Jesus appears to resurrect. Lazarus contains A to Z, and Eris, whilst Zacharias contains Z to A, and Arius. Why A to Z or vice versa? Because Aries Piso is referenced in Revelation as A to the O, first to the last. Now this is problematic too, because A to the O, that's Alpha to the Omega. That's Greek. Whoever said this would have been speaking in Aramaic. And so it would have been whatever the last letter is in the Aramaic alphabet, which I guess is just the Hebrew. I don't know if that's Zadi. So it wouldn't be Alpha to the Omega. They wouldn't have said that unless they were speaking in Greek, which they wouldn't have been. But anyway, in Revelation as A to the O, first to the last, and in the Latin alphabet it is A and Z that are the first and last letters. But what about in Aramaic? That's where it would have been spoken. So anyway, another example is found in Mary the Virgin betrothed to Joseph. Her name in the original Greek text is Maria, and in 7 places she is referred to in the genitive case, Marias, for which English translation would be Maria apostrophe S. The King James Bible not only translates Mary as Maria, forcing later translators to do the same, but gave a weak translation in all 7 instances of the genitive, as of Mary instead of Marys, which later Bibles often corrected. Intentionally or otherwise, the King James Bible conceals the 7 instances of the word Maria, apostrophe S, Marias, preventing the reader from seeing that they contain the letters Arius and M, Marias. Her espousal to Joseph is not obscured, perhaps because it's unlikely an English reader would notice that Joseph and Piso are anagrams in Hebrew. Another example is found in Maria Magdalene. Magdalene is very well known to be linked to fish. And we know this is significant because Jesus' story so plainly mirrors how Titus made his men become fishers of men. Because that's one of the brutal parallels between the two. Jesus predicts that when he meets Simon and Andrew on the fishing boat before his ministry even started, he says, "Come with me and I will make you fishers of men." And then you flash forward 40 years at the same place at the Sea of Galilee. Titus is fighting a battle against the Jews on the water, and the Jewish boat capsizes or something, and all the Jews end up in the water. Titus makes his men harpoon them when their head comes up above the water, or brings them in with nets, meaning that Titus has made his men become fishers of men. Fishing is piscor, P-I-S-C-O-R in Latin. Clearly, it is not hard to find a P in both Mary the Virgin, Parthenon, and in Magdalene, piscor. But if the reader finds this tenuous, which I do, the anagram link between Joseph and Piso is quite sufficient by itself. So what might the M represent? See, like, I think this is a valuable work, but I'm quibbling about it because I just don't think it's really that big of a deal what the APTVS stands for. The main part is that it stands for something. It is not noise. It's not a random pattern. It is there on purpose. That's the main point. What it actually means is kind of splitting hairs. Especially the TVS, we pretty much know what that is. The AP, and he's already claimed that the AP part, even though that's volume 1, 2, and 3 or 1 and 2 of the 7-volume work of Josephus, that was probably written later, because the parallels are not nearly as strong, and the letters are not nearly as well developed as they are for the V and the S, and you can see that on the thumbnail. One word beginning with M stands out as occurring very frequently in the Gospels, 243 times. This is the ancient word mega, M-E-G-A, which today is an internationally used prefix, such as like megahertz. English Bibles often translate it as mighty or great. For example, John 21:11 connects great with fish via the phrase great megalon, fish. If mega is the intended meaning of M, then splitting Maria's into two and Latinizing this gives us mighty Arius, hinting at mighty Arius, or Aries. Using the previous example, we can see that the words pointing to Aries or Arius, Piso, include mega, opiso, angel, and pneuma, P-N-E-U-M-A, meaning spirit or breath. The first and last letters being A and O, and as argued by Roman Piso, various writers refer to it using euphemisms like primus, meaning first, and as I will argue later, a constellation of 7 stars, that being the Big Dipper, or otherwise known as the Plow. I observe that there is one place we find all of these words together. Revelation 1, verses 10 through 20 says, "On the Lord's day I was in the Spirit, pneuma, and behind, which is opiso, me I heard a great megalon voice, like the Son of Man." Okay, I'm sorry, but I have to turn the page here. So all the suspense hopefully won't build up for too long here. representing the fallen angel Lucifer, thereby being very literally borne up, thereby preventing him dashing his feet on what is described simply as a stone, where in Jesus' story, the devil departs. I don't know. This doesn't seem like it's the right page. Yes, it isn't. Okay, I'm sorry. I have to take pictures of all these pages because it's so, convoluted. The pages are so small. I mean, the writing is so small. Okay. See if this is the right page. I think it is. And then you have to blow up the picture on the computer screen. Okay. Saying, I am the Alpha to the O, the first to the last. Write to the 7 churches, the mystery of the 7 stars is that the 7 stars are the angels, angeloi, of the 7 churches. So having seen all these links takes us to Revelation 10:20. We find the emphasis is being directed to a phrase that is Alpha to O, first to last. That has to do with the word opiso. And the word Aries, Arius, Piso has those exact characteristics. The first and last letters are indeed Alpha and O. In Greek, but not in Latin and not in Hebrew. So I know the New Testament is written in Greek, but it's a quote. That's my point. It's a quote, and the quote would have been spoken in Aramaic. The reason that 7 stars are so important will be explained later, but relates both to the constellation of the plow, which gets pushed unceasingly across the sky, and its 7 stars, and how the motif of 7 stars is found on the coinage of all 3 Flavian emperors, Vespasian, Titus, and Domitian. Well, that's kind of interesting. Okay, I think we're going to stop right there, and we'll dig into this example 5, which he says is the strongest one, when we come back tomorrow. Thanks for tuning in today. Please join us tomorrow, and have a great day. Like, share, subscribe.